Little Red Riding Hood. In a small village that stood by the edge of a wood lived a young girl known as Little Red Riding Hood. She was called this because she loved her red hood and wore it everywhere, even when she went to sleep. One day her mother handed Little Red Riding Hood a basket of freshly baked bread to take to her sick grandmother who lived on the other side of the forest. She looked her daughter straight in the eye and made Little Red Riding Hood promise one thing: be sure to stay on the path all the way to grandmother's house. Little Red Riding Hood smiled and nodded. Then she kissed her mother farewell and set out on her journey. As she skipped through the forest singing merrily to herself, Little Red Riding Hood didn't see the pair of dark, cold eyes that watched her from behind the trees, nor could she hear the sound of the soft padded feet that followed her quietly through the forest. So as she came round a bend, it was quite a surprise when a large wolf jumped out in front of her.
Off to visit someone?
My grandmother is sick.
Dear me, how dreadful.
The wolf's teeth glistened in the sun as he leaned towards Red Riding Hood and smiled slyly.
A poor sick grandmother needs flowers to warm her heart.
But I didn't bring any.
There's plenty out in the forest. Why don't you pick some there?
But Little Red Riding Hood remembered her mother's warning never to leave the path, so she said goodbye to the wolf and continued on her way. Soon after, though, she saw her grandmother's favourite flowers growing just off to one side of the path. They weren't very deep in the forest, and they would make such a lovely gift for her grandmother. I'll just quickly pick a few. And so she left the path and went into the forest to collect some. The cunning wolf saw this and set off. He ran straight to the grandmother's house where he knocked on the door. Who's there?
Little Red Riding Hood with a basket of bread.
The old woman was delighted that her granddaughter was visiting. Just lift the latch and come in. The wolf smiled. He let himself in and in moments had gobbled her up. He then quickly dressed himself in the grandmother's nightclothes and cap. He drew the curtains, jumped into her bed and lay waiting. It wasn't long before Little Red Riding Hood arrived at the front door with her beautiful bunch of flowers. She knocked on the door. Grandmother?
I'm here.
Little Red Riding Hood stepped back with surprise. That voice didn't sound like her grandmother at all. Has your cold given you a sore throat, grandmother?
Yes, dear. So just lift the latch and come in.
Little Red Riding Hood made her way into the darkened bedroom and pulled back the curtains. She peered at the figure in the bed. Grandmother, what big ears you have!
All the better to hear you with.
She stepped further in and looked a little closer. Grandmother, what big hands you have!
All the better to hug you with.
Little Red Riding Hood stepped closer again until her nose was almost touching the wolf's long snout. Grandmother, what big teeth you have!
All the better to eat you with.
And with that, the wolf jumped out of the bed and grabbed poor Little Red Riding Hood. Within seconds, he'd gobbled her up too. The wolf staggered outside, feeling very pleased with himself.
I'm so full. I think a nice little nap is in order.
So the sleepy wolf lay down beside the house and soon was snoring loudly. Now it so happened that a woodcutter passed by soon after this. He heard the snores and knew that the old lady never snored as loudly as that. He crept around the side of the house and found the greedy wolf fast asleep. He guessed what had happened and quickly cut him open. What a sight to see! Coughing and spluttering, Grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood climbed straight out of the wolf's belly. Little Red Riding Hood quickly gathered some stones from the garden outside and filled his belly with them. Grandmother then stitched the wolf's stomach together with her needle and thread. Later, when the wolf woke, he saw the three people and tried to run away. But the stones were so heavy that after a short distance he fell down, quite dead. Little Red Riding Hood unpacked the basket of bread and laid a table. Then, with the woodcutter and her grandmother, she had a splendid afternoon tea. That evening, she said her goodbyes and set off home. This time, though, she was very careful to do exactly as her mother had said. She stayed on that path all the way home.